Today's topic may be uncomfortable for some of you, but what I want you to understand is that I'm going to be talking about my truth. And I understand that you all have your own truth, but I hope that you can all listen to my story and not be affronted by it. I want us all to be open to an uncomfortable topic. Understand that I have had resistance to this presentation before. I've been labeled angry for it, and people have argued with me about it. But that's not really how I feel about it. I just want to throw this out there. It's just something that I figured out for myself, and I just want you all to get your point of view out of it. I respect your point of view, and I hope you all respect mine. Ideas and opinions are very important. We should all work to keep them protected together. Four weeks ago, a situation happened with my son who had broken his leg. My son's fine. We went to the doctors 1 week later after they broke their leg for a checkup. We didn't we weren't in an area we weren't in an area that had a high population of deaf people, so people did not have a lot of experience with interpreters. For 45 minutes I'm sitting in this waiting room, and I'm not just with my son who has a broken leg, but I'm also with my youngest son, and we're just sitting there waiting for so long. So at one point I take the interpreter and we go up to the receptionist. I try to get information about why this is taking so long. The receptionist is just apologizing, but not even looking at me. I try to get across the situation with my kids and try and get to put in with the doctors, but she just gives me no's. I ask her if she can, ask the doctor or a nurse, and she still gives the same answer. I ask her to look at me. The receptionist does finally look up, but she looks at the interpreter, not at me. I get her attention so that she's looking at me. This is a doctor's office, and we've been sitting here for an hour, but she didn't care. And finally, my children start crying, and that's when the receptionist sees how serious it is. Finally, the receptionist summons a nurse. Quickly, the nurse comes up and is apologetic. The nurse lets me know that I will see the doctor soon. But I get across to the nurse that I want to complain about the receptionist. So the receptionist tells me that the office manager will call me. I go back to sit down. And then the interpreter gets summoned up to the receptionist desk because the interpreter has a phone call. When the interpreter actually answers the phone, it's not for them, it's for me. The office manager had called for me. The office manager had wanted to discuss my complaint. So, the receptionist is right there staring at me as the office manager is asking me all these questions, and I get across to the office manager that I don't feel comfortable in this situation, and we postpone our conversation until later in the day. I go back to my seat again. But when I look up, the interpreter is saying something to the receptionist with her mouth covered. And this was odd to me. So when the interpreter came back, I tried to find out what had gone on. But the interpreter kept denying that she was even talking to the receptionist. Finally, when I kept persisting, the interpreter gave up and told me that the receptionist had wanted to say she was sorry and that she didn't want to get in trouble. And the interpreter told me that she told the receptionist that everything was okay. And that was not right. I told the interpreter that it was not okay. Why would you answer a question instead of directing her to me? But I got cut off and called into the doctor's office. Now, understand, I will work with that interpreter again. This situation has not destroyed my relationship with them, but it's that situation that has brought this idea to me, this idea of disempowerment. I want you all to look at this definition. Disempowerment is a powerful word. It means to remove power. So I know many of you are interpreters, and you have to play with the line of mediating personality, culture, language, all while interpreting. And I understand your point of view of this challenge. Still, as a person from a family who has grown up with the deaf experience, has deaf children, has worked as a CDI, as a person who is in the center of the deaf community for generations, that I just want to let you know that that's where I'm coming from. Growing up, I looked at both the deaf and the hearing community, and I know that they are very different, but they are also very similar. It's important to remember the similarities. So that is from where we're going to look at disempowerment from. There are two types of disempowerments. There's the kind of disempowerment from the situation I gave you before, and then there's economic disempowerment. I know that you all discuss that later tonight. I'm going to give you an example of societal disempowerment, situational disempowerment. So, I went to a hearing high school in the 80s. I had an interpreter for 8 years, but they were not certified. So, I took up an acting class while I was in high school, and there was 25 hearing students and a few deaf students. Every day, that interpreter missed something, or they would critique our signs. And this class was in the beginning of the day, and so the interpreter would sign so quickly, so early in the morning, and all the hearing students would get involved. But I couldn't understand what the interpreter was signing. For me, that situation was such disempowerment. I was just a high school girl. At that time, I'd struggled with my identity. And for that interpreter to disempower me was not good for me at that time. Anyway, to this day, when somebody comes up to me, never deaf, always a hearing person, when they come up to me and they tell me that I'm signing too fast, there's a little part inside of me that takes me back to that time. I mean, I always work through them so that they understand, but inside me, there's just this little part nagging at me. An interpreter should never disempower their own client. Your job as an interpreter is to ensure communication access, not to disempower. I understand that many interpreters do not mean to take power, but it is important to keep in the back of your mind to not disempower the deaf community you work with. I see this kind of story happen in history again and again and again, where people take advantage of the deaf community for economic disempowerment. I have many examples and many stories of hearing people taking advantage of deaf people. These kind of things happen a lot, and they still do. So I have this one story, and this is a true story. It's not something I made up, it's not fiction. There was a car company, and they spread this advertisement around. And the point of the advertisement was it was real people. That was the advertisement. That they were filming real people's opinions on these cars. They were not actors. They were paid, yes, but they were real people. This woman was in the advertisement. I noticed something. I'm watching the advertisement, and I see this girl, and I'm like, she's not deaf. So I call and ask the company, and they tell me, yes, she's deaf. I will discuss this more later in my workshop, but looking at the way she was signing in the advertisement, I just felt like she wasn't deaf. So I researched, and I know these kind of things happen a lot, so I'm just going to abbreviate this. In the end, I figured out that she was hearing. She was an interpreter. And she had pretended to be deaf. This commercial was not acted. It was supposed to be real people. So she gets asked, "Are you deaf or hearing?" And she lied. And so she faxed me her birth certificate, and I realized it was fake at some point. Remember, I'm abbreviating the story. Anyway, she finally admits to being hearing and having lied about being deaf the whole time. But she had gotten paid $75 for this ad. I asked the company, "Are you going to take legal action?" The company responded, "No, it wasn't worth." But the fun part is, she still works as an interpreter. She's never apologized to the community about what happened. Even though she stole from deaf people. So now we're going to go further into economic disempowerment. We're going to talk about ASL teachers. And this happens with ASL teachers all of the time. Baby sign language teachers, certified, they're almost never deaf. They won't give me the specific numbers about who is, but I'm assuming it's around 20% are deaf. And so much of it is the wrong signs. But the majority of these teachers are hearing. The specific number I don't know, but deaf studies programs have 20, 25. Maybe they're all of those teachers deaf? No. What's wrong with that picture? No, understand that maybe you can't find someone who's qualified to teach that, and I understand that situation. I still think that there's a problem with the situation. If you can't find one who's skilled, okay, you have a few options that you can do. I know, understand that my ideas are not perfect. These are just a few suggestions I have. First, you can keep the position open or temporary until you find a deaf person who's qualified. You can use it as time for someone to practice the skill. Why do we allow hearing people to teach hearing people about deaf instead of allowing deaf people to teach hearing people about deaf people? Now, what about hiring opportunities for deaf people? I want to talk about this concept of deaf economics. I first learned this word, this term, deaf economics, when I was interviewing this person. This person was very enthusiastic about deaf economics. I have a specific quote from them that I want to share. Deaf people support, no, sorry, let me correct myself. Deaf or hearing people, doesn't matter. If more people support deaf businesses, then they will grow and more deaf people will be hired. And as more deaf people will be hired, more deaf people will have works, and the community will still expand. And in doing that, signing will expand. Deaf people will have more power and influence, and the communities, hearing and deaf, will become more equal. I know a lot of people prefer communicating with people who communicate the same way as them, but ASL is a very wealthy language. Back in 2001, I went to this meeting. It was a perfect place for you to put your toes into the water for these kind of ideas. There was a pool and it was good. There's many interpreters signing and speaking. And I just had a thought that, hey, they're making money off my language, and I shared it with the person who was sitting next to me. And they'll see. Every year I think about it. I said, why don't we talk about it? It's true. I make money off my language too. Trilingual interpreters, like, they make money off of English. Is it wrong? I have no problem with interpreters making money off of my language, but understand, it's very important that you understand this. When I'm talking about making money, I'm talking about it in a specific way. When you work honestly and you work with our language and our culture and you take it up and you learn it, it's important that you dive head in deep with it and you continue to improve and you're not big-headed. That's my opinion about it. When they're little, deaf people don't understand interpreters. To be a legal interpreter and have communication access and they're learning, that's a good opportunity for us to work on not disempowering each other. We'll talk about that later tonight at my workshop. I don't want to talk about the concept of right or wrong at this moment. I'm hungry to talk about this topic. I just think it's really important that we take advantage of deaf companies. That you go to deaf companies and you take advantage of them. I want to really go in depth about why people are against people making money off language. Maybe it's a harsh truth, but if we can accept it and talk about it, we might be able to figure out our feelings about this. We can work together, our culture and our language, and then we can all work together. I will discuss in depth about this all tonight at my workshop. It's natural to try and connect with each other. That interpreter situation that I talked about with my son, she did admit to me that she felt bad and she apologized, but it wasn't for her to decide to tell the receptionist that it was all going to be okay. I understand, but you have to not disempower deaf people. How can we make more deaf places and make the world more visual and accessible? We have to prioritizing hiring deaf people. Why not deaf? Why can't a deaf person play that part? So I want you all to know that my trigger point is communication access. People believe that the communities must be separate, but often many deaf people, including myself, feel that their communication access is taken away. And that's true. That's what happened with my interpreter. She blocked her mouth as she talked to the receptionist and then would not admit what was happening. That's not giving communication access. I feel like we need to make sure this doesn't increase. It's important to remember that those situations can happen, and if they do, you have to prioritize communication access. Ultimately, we need to strive for respecting each other. And I understand that an important part of interpreting is the culture and the language aspects, but as an interpreter, you always have to be respectful with each other. Tonight at my workshop, we will go more in depth with this all about disempowerment and all these things that we discussed today, much more in depth than I went over them now. Disempowerment's meaning is not as important as making sure we all respect each other.